So Evan, thank you very much for being here today.
Thanks, Dan.
I know that you had a very rich experience in the PSMP program, and I thought today we could talk about your project, about the process that you use, and also the strategy journey map tool that you applied in that. So welcome, and give us some of your thoughts.
So my project included a range of stakeholders, quite a wide group, and they came from a lot of different backgrounds. And so for me, it was really trying to find some solutions that worked for all those in what is a pretty complex environment. So I really had to try and tie down the scope of my project and really understand what the risks were associated with doing it and with the outcomes that I came up with, and really set some milestones, because in the time that we had, there was a lot of things that I wanted to do, and I really needed to make sure that we stayed on track for that. I had to pull out the right tools and make sure that I was applying those in the right context for the right reasons. And in particular, I used some interviews to gain understanding from those stakeholders, and I really had to focus on that and make sure that I prepped for that and was able to undertake those in the time that was available. I took the approach of it being an exemplar project, so I really tried to use all the tools that I thought were appropriate to that project, and really set them out, those tools out in what seemed to me to be a logical, natural flow of stages. And I guess the important thing was to tie all that back and really look at making sure that what I was trying to achieve and what I found really did deliver public value out of that.
Great, and Evan, I noticed that you used the structure of the strategy journey map in a very particular way, and it seemed to underpin the way that you approached the overall project. Would you like to give us some insight into your thinking and the way that you actually did that?
Yeah. So for me, it was, as I said, it was about giving myself a natural flow and an order of things. And it was really, I wanted to start at the big picture, look at the operating environment, understand what public value looks like in our space, and then really start narrowing it down, understand who's involved, what's going on in that space, undertake some interviews so I can test my assumptions and gain some learnings, analyse all that material, and then come out with some very clear recommendations and communicating those up to my leaders.
And I recall too that you used the strategy journey map approach in both your 1B assignment and in the second assignment when you were actually doing the final report. Tell us a little bit about that.
It was very useful for me to do it in the 1B assignment, and that was really helped me do the planning that I needed to do for the project. In assignment 2, actually doing the project, it was my guide, it was what I used. But as I did the project, I did find that I had to tweak that on the way through as I learnt more and discovered more. It turned out that some of the concepts that I wanted to introduce were perhaps not as applicable as I thought, and others I realised were more front and centre than I anticipated.
When you actually did your reporting back, Evan, did you use this same structure for your final report to your organisation?
Yeah, that fed into how I fed back into the organisation. I used that to flesh out my business model canvas and also my logic mapping to really explain what I recommended, but also the reasons behind that, and give a bit of context.
So let's do a little bit digging down into more of the detail of your approach, if that's okay with you. So I know that you looked really closely at the operating environment, and from memory, you actually used the capability analysis, and you thought about it in terms of complexity. So tell us a little bit about your thinking and process that you used there.
Yeah. The operating environment that my project's in is quite complex. There's a lot of things going on, and a lot of interwoven drivers happening in there, and I really wanted to understand what they were in that external environment and then how they related to my project. I also understood and had made some assumptions on what the strengths were within our organisation, and I really wanted to test those and understand them to see whether they were as valuable as what we thought.
And then you moved on from memory and you worked really closely and thoughtfully about the stakeholders and the stakeholder landscape in which this project was occurring. Give us some insights about that, if you would.
I really wanted to understand the project and its objectives from the stakeholders' perspective. So I spent a lot of time on using tools like the Think Feel Map to really try and get into their shoes, and really use that then as a basis to look at things like how the project would affect them, what their level of influence would be, and that fed into the work I did using interviews and service blueprints to lay out that information and said test those assumptions, see what we can do to make better.
And I was really fascinated by the use of the service blueprint. It seemed that you were really able to pull a whole lot of detail out of the process. Tell us a bit more about the service blueprinting process and how you actually did that.
Yeah. So I did the service blueprint. I had to go myself first to really set the basics up, and then I engaged both with our internal team to build that, and then used the interviews to build out the external side. I had to take some different approaches given the stakeholder group that I was engaging with, because they were spread so geographically. I couldn't bring them into one spot to engage in the service blueprint in the way that perhaps we normally do. And so I used the interview process to really understand the process from their side, and then transcribe that into the service blueprint to make sure that it covered how they saw the processes that we asked them to undertake.
And Evan, before you mentioned the business model canvas and you mentioned the investment logic map, and I know that they were some of the fundamental pieces that you used to communicate the project and also demonstrate value. Can you talk a little bit more about those, if you would, please?
So in my organisation, it's very valuable to have a nice, tight way of presenting the findings, and both those tools were quite valuable for me to do that rather than presenting a full report. And so that, as I said, they were able to present my recommendations quite succinctly and give some information around that about resourcing requirements, services that we would deliver, and then also the background and the context to that about what our benefits are and what the underlying problems were that we were looking to solve.
So Evan, how do you think this was received in your workplace?
The impacts longer term for the project were good outcomes. So we were able to look at how we can engage with our stakeholders, and we can look at how we redesign our processes and present those findings so that we get better outcomes, better processes, and that's a tool that we've been able to use in other areas of our business as well.
And the business model canvas in particular, how did that resonate, and what message did that deliver?
It was very good in delivering a very clear message about our recommendations, and to really focus what we wanted to achieve and what we were asking our leaders to support.
And I know that you had some really good advice to the participants in the program that you came along and spoke to. So give us some tips and what to do next.
Sure. I make sure that the project aligns with your role if you can. It certainly makes it easier. Absolutely utilise interviews if you're engaging with your stakeholders. It's a really valuable tool. Always ask questions of your facilitator, because that's the easiest way to make sure that you really do understand the project and what's expected of you. And similarly, make sure you have a look at the comments that come back on your 1B project. They're very valuable, and utilise the online forum that the facilitator will run for you ahead of your project, and make sure you look at different ways to present your information. So using post-it notes, rich pictures, tables, whatever's appropriate for your project. Really think about what's the best way to present your information.
Evan, now you've completed the program, give us some thoughts about some takeaways for you in your personal and professional life from the PSMP program.
Yeah. So I really got out of the PSMP program a better understanding of myself and a better understanding of my leaders and how I need to engage with them. And I've also taken a number of the tools like the service blueprint and been applying them in my workplace as part of day-to-day business these days.
Oh, great. And as a final shout out to the to future PSMP folks, what would you like to say?
I'd say sign up and have a go. It's a fair bit of work, but it's well worth it.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for coming along today. That's wonderful. Thanks, Evan. Great. Thank you.
Now, can you just stay there and give me a big smile, please? Thank you. Well
Thank
done.
you.
Now you need to do some magic editing.
And maybe